Have the terrible twos come early for you? My name's Jodie Thornton, and I want to talk to you about a gentle parenting aligned approach to really understanding and also helping your child through this really tricky period, which will make it easier on you as well. So, the very first thing we want to talk about is when people say the terrible twos have come early, what they're usually referring to is the developmental stage that happens at around about 18 months. And in that stage, your child's brain is growing like in a real growth spurt kind of place, right? So what we call it is disequilibrium. And then over time, your child will fall back into equilibrium at around about 2 and then go back into disequilibrium at around 2.5. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, my child didn't have the terrible twos. They had the, what do they call it? 3-nado, I think it is. Oh, no, 3-nager and 4-nado. Anyways, there's lots of different names, right? And a lot of people will say, my child didn't have this stage, but they had that stage. And some people will say, my child was really tricky at around the half birthday, like all of those young years. And this is really just a combination of factors. It can be what's going on in your family life. It can be personality-wise. It can be so many different reasons as to why it happens. But for all children, they're having this developmental growth stage at around the half birthdays between 1 and 6. But so it can show up differently, but that developmental growth stage is happening regardless. Now, what that developmental growth stage does is that it actually means that your child is growing a new set of capability in their brain. And this is a very unscientific explanation. It's basically that your brain has more capacity, and that new brain capacity needs to make connections to the brain that was already there. And it's not as simple as this, but for conceptual understanding. And so in order for the new parts of the brain to connect to the old parts of the brain, the connections between the old parts of the brain need to break, right? And so what that does is it means your child is noticing different things. Your child is experiencing different things. Your child has, if you imagine like they've grown overnight and then it's hard to walk because everything is different. Their center of gravity is different, or their height is different. Like it's just all different to them. And so what that can mean is that everything can feel a lot like they have a lot shorter a fuse for themselves. And so that can mean that it can come out in tantrums, rage, hitting, not listening, anything that requires them to have a certain level of emotional regulation. It is going to be harder for a child who's in that stage than when they're in that equilibrated stage. So that being the case, what we want to do is really look at how do we support them through this stage. Now, as always, if you are going through a really tricky time, you can do whatever you need to do to cope through this period. And then for most kids, the phase will pass and you will have another chance when they hit the next age. But having said that, if you're not going through a challenging time, or maybe you are going through a challenging time, but addressing this with your child will actually make life overall easier so you can get through this challenging time, then I really recommend this is a great time to bulk up your parenting skills, because you can make this stage easier for your child and for yourself with some skills. Now, it's really interesting because when I look at a lot of the gentle parenting advice around things like tantrums, not listening, hitting, lashing out physically, biting, all of those kind of behaviors that we find tricky, a lot of the gentle parenting advice is like a script. It's like, if your child does this, you should say that. And ultimately, what it kind of looks like is like, don't bring your emotions into it. So don't put additional pressure on your child by guilting or shaming. Don't yell yourself. Don't have your own tantrum. And those things may or may not be realistic for some of us because we are having our own baggage and we're having our own issues. That's one thing. But then they're also basically saying that if you just say nice, supportive things, and then we wait until your child gets it, right? We wait until your child can like understand that then it's not appropriate to get what you want through hitting, right? That is the slow way. And it's so much better than if we rewind to previous generations where there was a lot of yelling, guilting and shaming, and also the ways that they dealt with behaviors that were isolating. So things like timeout, things like withdrawing attention or affection if they're not behaving appropriately. All of those things absolutely are much worse than if we do the polite supportive script but then just wait for your child to kind of get it, to get to understand what's expected of them. What we really want to do that's taking that next step to make things even more effective for your child, more supportive for your child, is actually to solve the underlying problem. So for all of these behaviors, your child is having a problem that they need to solve. And so if they're having a tantrum, maybe the problem is they're not getting something that they need. And people will say, oh, but it's not something that they need, it's something that they want. A want is always one option to get the need met, right? And so when we say they don't need that, well, they may not need ice cream for dinner, but they do need something that ice cream for dinner was going to give them, which might be control or autonomy. It might be novelty. It might be fun. It might be feeling like they matter. There's so many reasons why they might need the thing that they're asking for that we see as a want. And what we really want to be doing is helping your child notice those feelings when they're a whisper before they become really loud, and then also being able to speak up for them. And so this can be a little tricky at this 18-month-old stage. Kids have varying abilities to say what they need. But if we look at it, it's not just verbal communication. So often if we use the words to describe what that is going on for them, some kids can pick up the words that they need. But at 18 months, they're so expressive and they're so able to communicate in ways other than using their words. We want to make sure that we're not saying, well, we can't figure it out because they're not able to express themselves yet. Sometimes you will not be able to figure out because it is harder when you don't have that verbal communication. But ultimately, there are other ways that your child can express themselves, and we can figure out a way that they can communicate what they need. The other thing is that at this age, often there's like a handful of things that they need regularly, and it's not like a 6-year-old who has a vast array of things that it might be. And like for all kids and all people, there's usually a small number of things that are like the most common. But particularly when we're looking at this like terrible twos came early kind of stage, usually there's a small number of things that are routinely coming up. And once your child knows how to express that in a way to you that may or may not be verbally, it may be in body language or pointing, that's body language too, but you know what I mean. There's ways that they can communicate to us what they need. When we get to that stage, it makes it so much easier for your child to get what they need. And so that would mean looking at what is the root cause, what is it that they need, and how do we get them that while also being considerate of everybody else involved, right? That's what we're looking for. And that's the case whether the issue is tantrums, whether the issue is hitting or kicking or lashing out physically in any way, and it's the same for not listening. In all of those cases, what we're looking for is what is the underlying need that's driving this behavior, and how do we get that need met in a way that works for them as well as everybody else that's involved. So I think it's really important to recognize that we're not just limited to verbal communication. Yes, it can be tricky, but we've got some options. So one is, if you can sense what is going on in the situation, what clues do you have that might give us an understanding of what it is that your child actually needs, and you know you've got into a need if the need that you've identified is something that can be met in a million different ways. If it's something that's very limited, chances are that's a strategy or a want. But if it's a need, it's something that we could find a way to make it work no matter what circumstances we're in. And it's something that you feel is valid, right? That's when you know that you've gotten to that need level. So we're looking for what clues do we have that will give us an understanding of what it is that your child is after. And we might check in by doing it verbally. Now, if your child is tantruming, you may need to help them to regulate before they can really talk about what's going on for them. And that's another skill set that's a really good one to build at this age if your child is getting overwhelmed routinely. But once you've regulated them and actually checking in with them verbally, now sometimes checking in verbally doesn't work for this age because it's hard for them to really express it. Not express it, it can be hard for them to conceptualize what it is that you're talking about, depending on the need that we're talking about here. In that case, what we want to do is experiment, right? We want to experiment. If we think, okay, in this situation, my child is really upset. This is what's happened. It might be this. And we will experiment and see if it works. Now, if what you choose to do works, but it's like a bottomless pit, and a great example of this is one-on-one time. If your child is getting heaps of one-on-one time, but as soon as the one-on-one time stops, everything goes haywire again, that tells you that it's actually not, the problem isn't connection, right? That tells you that the problem is something else. One-on-one time does a lot of things for kids. It does connection. It also demonstrates that they matter. It also is a great way for them to have fun because, you know, they're getting interaction and you're playing together or doing something together. For extroverted kids, it gets them that extroverted connection, right? The ability to talk about what's going on for them. There's even more things. Like I think there's probably most needs one-on-one time needs, and so it's such a good example of something where if you can't seem to fill their cup, chances are you've actually got a situation where you're filling the wrong cup, right? That actually it's something else. So we want to keep experimenting to find what helps and what works. Now, one of the things that can be really useful at this age is also setting them up with independent play skills. Independent play is something that really helps because it means your child is able to have fun even if you need to be doing the dishes or cooking the dinner. All kids will have different capacity to have independent play depending on their personality and the situation that they're in, but we can at least provide a learning environment for independent play and see how much that helps, right? And so that can be really, really helpful at the 18-month age group, is really finding them. And in some of the parenting styles, they talk about a yes space. In the RIE, for example, they talk about a yes space. And in the yes space means that basically everything in that area they can touch, they can manipulate, they can do whatever they need to. There's nothing that you need to stop them, and that can help them in that really independent play space. Now, overall, if we're trying to figure out what the underlying needs are, sometimes it's not a quick process, right? If this phase has come about because they're in that cognitive developmental stage, it might be that there's actually a good half a dozen things that we need to sort out, and it might take some time to get through all of them. That being the case, what we want to do as well is really make sure that we focus on the things that help them regulate, so that we're turning the volume down. So if you imagine with a radio, when we tune the radio in, that's the wrong example. On a radio, in the old school radios, if you turn the volume up too high, you actually can't hear the lyrics anymore because the speaker can't cope with the volume that you've got. And what we want to do is we're turning the volume down, not so that we can't hear it, but so we can hear it more clearly, right? And so for that regulation, the things that help is getting enough sleep, which I know is not necessarily easy, but if we can prioritize sleep as much as your situation allows, making sure they're fed well, but not just necessarily they've had enough to eat, but protein can make a big difference in making sure that they actually feel full. Again, not necessarily easy at this stage. They can be so distracted that it's hard to get them to eat enough to actually feel full. We want to prioritize it as much as we can. We want to look for having play that gets them giggling, right? So we want to look at weight, and I wouldn't use tickling for this because tickling actually activates both our fear center and our pleasure center. And so we want to actually avoid tickling for this purpose. We want to look at something that makes them, they think it's hilarious, and that basically gives them the signal that they are safe and that everything's okay. We're looking for those kinds of playful things. Now, really importantly, we're not using play to distract from the feelings. We're using play, the same with that radio, we're using play to turn the volume down enough that we can hear. So that means, conceptually, right? So that means we have enough emotional space to actually be able to figure out what's going on, and we have enough time, because when we look at all of the issues around tantrums, lashing out physically and not listening, addressing those takes up so much time in the day that it actually makes it really hard to have the time to problem solve, right? So we want to make sure that we're regulating enough so that we can actually solve these issues one by one. So I will, in the description of this video, I'm going to link to some webinars that I have that are free around helping your children through tantrums, around getting your strong-willed kids to listen, and helping children stop hitting. That helping children stop hitting webinar is appropriate for hitting, biting, kicking, any kind of physical lashing out, and all of those might be useful for you. I would like to say though, at this stage, it's such a great moment to actually increase your parenting skills overall, and then it makes this stage easier and also sets you up well for the next stages that are to come, right? So if we want to look at things like helping your child understand their emotions, helping your child speak up for their feelings, holding space for your children's feelings so that you can help them regulate, so that you can hear what's really going on, and problem solving in a way that works for everybody, and actually really linking all of those feelings to those underlying needs. So all of these skills will be obviously really, really useful for you as your child grows. And now, if you have the time and space to do it, now is a great time to do it. It makes this stage so much easier, and it really sets your child up. If we think about all of those skills, in the beginning, it's you as the parent doing it for your child. Over time, we want your child to actually become independent with these skills. We want your child to be able to regulate themselves. We want your child to be able to speak up for their feelings and needs, not just to you, but to other adults and their friends and siblings. We want your child to be able to lead problem solving themselves, whether it's their own independent issue or whether it's with friends, siblings, or other adults. We want them to be able to participate in those problem solving processes. All of those skills, eventually we want your child to have those skills for themselves, because we know that that's what makes adulthood a lot easier for everybody, right? And so that being the case, the earlier you get in and start teaching your child these skills, the more years of practice they have, and the less problems you have as a family spending time doing things that are connecting and growing and deepening your relationships and helping your child understand their relationship to themselves. All of those things are much easier when you have these skills. So if this is a time where you actually have the time and space to be able to get started on these skills, the younger your child does, the better. It's never too late. So if you're in a situation where you're not able to do it right now, I want to say that if you do it next year or the year after that, or when your child is 44, whenever is the right time for you, it's never too late. But the younger we get in, the more positive experiences they have with them, with understanding themselves and problem solving in and of itself, that makes them, it gets them closer to mastery faster. And also it just makes that, like, the whole family vibe so much nicer when everybody is able to problem solve and get along together. So if you would like to work on those skills, I have a course called Confident Connected Parenting, and in that course we go through each and every one of these skills. So the emotional awareness, tying the emotions to the underlying needs, being able to articulate what's going on, helping your child to regulate, and then getting them to become independently able to regulate, and that problem solving process of figuring out what is the underlying need and how do we get that need met while being considerate of everybody else who's involved. It also covers how to handle your own triggers, and so we work through some processes of like unpacking some of the triggers that are able to be like actually dissolved and they don't affect you anymore. We also have processes for those triggers that actually might need some more therapeutic approach. So I'm not a psychologist, I'm a coach. So if you have some triggers that actually would need a more therapeutic approach, and either you're working on it but not done yet, or now's not the time for you to be working on that, then we can work on some parenting strategies to make sure that those triggers don't impact your parenting, they don't impact your child's experience growing up. All of that is included in this course. Once you purchase it, you have access for as long as it exists. If I ever decide to wind it up, I'll give you 12 months notice, but I really don't expect to do that. In this course, you have pre-recorded modules so that you can learn each step, one step at a time, but at your own pace. So if you want to go really fast, you can go really fast. If you need to take your time, you can take your time. We also have live calls, so you can come along and ask questions about how I'm working on this skill. My child is, when I try to do this is how my child is responding and I can't work out what to do next. You can come and ask your question and I will personally answer it. We'll be on video together and I'll answer your question with your own specific circumstances. In addition to that, there are modules around helping your child build those skills independently, right? So we're not just getting to a stage where you are a very effective emotions manager of the house. We're actually getting to a place where your child is independent. So you can take your time and get through that course in a time frame that's appropriate to you. And I'll pop the link for that course in the description of the video. And if you have any questions at all about the course or the content or what's going on for your 1-year-old, please do send me an email. It's jody@jodythornton.com.